If you are over 60 and you have ever sat in a middle economy seat for 6 hours with swollen legs, back pain, or a medical condition that made every hour harder than the last, there is a very strong chance you could have moved to business class for free. I am Maria. I was a flight attendant for 22 years, and in this video I'm going to give you the exact words to say mid-flight so that a business class seat opens up for you, legally, respectfully, and with full airline cooperation. Drop a comment right now with your age and the last long flight you took in economy, because what you are about to learn might change every flight you take from this point forward. Most passengers over 60 believe that once the door closes, the cabin is locked. Seats are assigned. Classes are separated. Whatever you paid for at booking is what you get for the entire flight. That assumption is exactly what airlines are counting on, and it is keeping senior travelers with real, documented medical needs sitting in pain for hours when empty business class seats are available 3 rows in front of them. Here is something the airline industry does not put in the boarding pass email. Mid-flight cabin upgrades for medical reasons exist as a formal, documented policy at every major U.S. and international carrier. They are not advertised, they are not offered, but they are available to any passenger who knows how to ask, when to ask, and what words to use. And the passengers most likely to qualify: travelers over 60 with circulation issues, back conditions, post-surgical recovery needs, respiratory conditions, or mobility limitations, are almost universally the passengers least likely to know this option exists. I want to tell you about a passenger named Gerald. He was 72 years old, a retired high school principal from Tennessee, fit, organized, and not someone who complained easily. Gerald had a knee replacement 8 months before a 7-hour flight to visit his daughter in Portugal. His surgeon had told him to keep the leg elevated and to avoid prolonged compression for at least a year post-surgery. Gerald had written that instruction down. He had it in his carry-on bag. He sat in a standard economy seat for 7 hours, with his knees slowly swelling against the seat in front of him, because nobody had ever told him that medical documentation, plus the right words to a flight attendant, could move him into a lie-flat business class seat that was sitting empty 4 rows ahead of him the entire flight. Gerald landed in Lisbon, barely able to walk. His daughter called the airline to complain. The customer relations agent told her Gerald could have been accommodated mid-flight if he had simply asked, using the medical necessity framework. Nobody had told him. Nobody was going to tell him. The system was working exactly as designed. Gerald's story is not rare. It is repeated on thousands of flights every single week. And the reason it keeps happening to senior travelers specifically comes down to 3 things airlines understand very well about this demographic. First, travelers over 60 are statistically more likely to have genuine, documented medical conditions that qualify for mid-flight accommodation. They are also statistically less likely to know those conditions give them standing to make a formal request mid-flight. The qualification rate is high. The ask rate is nearly 0. Second, senior travelers are more likely to tolerate discomfort quietly out of a sense of not wanting to be a burden. I watched this hundreds of times in 22 years. A 74-year-old woman grimacing in pain for 4 hours rather than pressing the call button because she did not want to inconvenience anyone. That instinct is deeply human and deeply costly. Third, and this surprised me when I learned it from colleagues in cabin crew training, flight attendants are specifically trained to offer mid-flight upgrades for medical situations, but only when a passenger initiates the conversation using the right framing. We cannot diagnose passengers. We cannot assume someone is in pain. We cannot offer an upgrade proactively without creating liability issues for the airline. But we are fully authorized to respond when a passenger presents their situation correctly. Before I go further, hit that like button if you have ever suffered through a long flight with a health condition and wished you could have done something about it. It helps us reach more senior travelers who need this information. Here's the foundational principle before I give you the exact scripts. Flight attendants mid-flight have 3 things that check-in agents do not. They have direct visual knowledge of which premium seats are empty. They have the authority to flag a passenger for medical accommodation without supervisor approval on most carriers. And they have a personal, human investment in passenger well-being that is genuinely different from a ticket counter transaction. A check-in agent is processing volume. A flight attendant mid-flight is managing a contained environment where your comfort and health directly affects the entire cabin experience. The phrase that opens this conversation is, "I need to share something with you privately." Those 6 words do 3 things simultaneously. They signal that what you are about to say is medical and personal, not a complaint or a demand. They invite the flight attendant into a one-on-one human conversation rather than a policy transaction. And they create a moment of professional attention that is completely different from pressing the call button to ask for a blanket. Every script I am about to give you begins from that place of private, respectful, human communication. Use this when you have a documented circulatory condition, deep vein thrombosis history, post-surgical recovery, or a physician's instruction to elevate your legs or avoid prolonged compression. I need to share something with you privately. I have a medical condition. I had surgery on and my doctor has given me written instructions to keep it elevated during long travel. I have the documentation with me. I am not in a crisis, but I am concerned about the next several hours. Is there any possibility of accommodation in a seat where I can extend my leg? Here is why this works. You have done 4 things in that single statement. You have framed it as a pre-existing documented medical situation, not a sudden complaint. You have offered evidence, which immediately elevates your request from a preference to a medical claim. You have de-escalated by saying you are not in a crisis, which removes the pressure of an emergency response and opens the door to a calm accommodation conversation. And you have asked for a functional outcome, a seat where you can extend your leg, rather than asking directly for business class, which keeps the flight attendant focused on solving your problem, rather than defending a class boundary. In my career, I moved passengers with circulation documentation into premium economy or business class seats on at least 40 occasions. Not once because the airline told me to. Every single time because a passenger gave me the information I needed to justify the accommodation within my discretionary authority. A passenger named Sylvia, age 68, a retired nurse from Oregon, had a documented history of DVT, deep vein thrombosis, blood clots that form in the legs during prolonged immobility. Her cardiologist had written a travel letter strongly recommending lie-flat or fully reclining seating on flights over 4 hours. Sylvia had that letter in her bag on a 6-hour flight and said nothing for the first 2 hours because she assumed the letter was only relevant at check-in. When a fellow passenger encouraged her to speak to the crew, she used almost exactly this script. The senior flight attendant checked the business cabin, found 3 empty seats, consulted briefly with the purser, and moved Sylvia within 8 minutes. Sylvia spent the remaining 4 hours horizontal. She landed without the leg swelling that had plagued her on every previous long flight. Same letter, same condition, different outcome because she used it mid-flight. Use this when you are traveling with a CPAP machine, oxygen concentrator, or have a respiratory condition that is being aggravated by economy cabin air quality or reclined seats from passengers in front of you. Say this: I need to share something with you privately. I use a CPAP machine and I have a respiratory condition that requires me to keep my upper body at a certain angle during sleep. The passenger in front of me is fully reclined, and I am finding it difficult to breathe comfortably. I do not want to create any difficulty with that passenger. Here is the mechanism inside this script. You have identified a medical device, CPAP use, which immediately qualifies your situation under most carriers' medical accommodation policies. You have described a specific, observable problem caused by cabin configuration, not by your own discomfort preference. And critically, you have preemptively handled the social complication by saying you do not want to create difficulty for the other passenger. That phrase does something remarkable. It removes the flight attendant's biggest hesitation, which is a confrontation with another passenger, and focuses their problem-solving entirely on finding you a better seat. A passenger named Raymond, 71, a retired electrician from Colorado, had sleep apnea and used a CPAP machine on overnight flights. On a 9-hour transatlantic flight, he found himself unable to use his machine effectively because his seat back would not recline sufficiently and the passenger ahead was fully flat. He pressed the call button, spoke privately to the flight attendant on duty, and used almost exactly these words. The flight attendant moved him to a bulkhead seat in premium economy with full recline access at no charge, and made a note in the cabin log that a medical CPAP accommodation had been made. Raymond slept for 5 hours. He landed rested for the first time on an international flight in 11 years. The cost of knowing the right words, 0. Use this when you are experiencing active pain from a back condition, spinal stenosis, arthritis, or hip condition that is worsening as the flight progresses. I need to share something with you privately. I have a spinal condition, and I am experiencing increasing pain that I am concerned about for the remainder of this flight. I am not in an emergency, but I want to be transparent with you before it becomes one. Is there any seating option on this aircraft that would allow me to change my position? I want to handle this quietly and without any fuss. The phrase, "before it becomes one," is the hinge of this script. It is not a threat. It is a responsible, forward-looking statement that any trained flight attendant will hear as a professional signal. We are trained to take proactive action on medical situations, precisely to prevent escalation. When a passenger tells me something might become an emergency if not addressed, I am not hearing a complaint. I am hearing a professional cue to act now, while the options are still low stress and available. The phrase, "I want to handle this quietly and without any fuss," is equally important. It tells the flight attendant, you are not going to make a scene. You are not going to be a difficult passenger. You are a cooperative person presenting a genuine situation and trusting them to help. That combination, medical signal plus cooperative framing, is almost irresistible to a well-trained cabin crew member. A passenger named Norma, 75, a retired librarian from Massachusetts, had severe spinal stenosis and had been prescribed movement and positional changes every 90 minutes by her pain management specialist. 2 hours into a 5-hour flight, she was in significant pain and had begun to look visibly distressed. When a flight attendant noticed and approached, Norma used this script almost word for word. The business cabin had 5 empty seats. The purser authorized the move in 3 minutes. Norma spent the rest of the flight in a fully reclining seat with a footrest and arrived able to walk off the plane without her daughter having to meet her with a wheelchair, as had happened on her 2 previous flights. Use this when you are a senior traveling with a companion who has the medical condition and you want to advocate on their behalf without overstepping. I need to share something with you privately on behalf of my redacted. They have a medical condition, and they are not comfortable asking themselves because they do not want to be a burden. I want to ask on their behalf. Is there any accommodation available that would help them get through this flight more safely? This script solves the most common obstacle I observed in 22 years of flying. The passenger who needs help most is often the one least willing to ask for it. Their spouse or companion sees the situation clearly, but does not know if it is appropriate to intervene. This script gives the companion standing to advocate, frames the request through the lens of the patient's reluctance rather than entitlement, and uses the word safely, which is a word every flight attendant is trained to respond to without hesitation. A passenger named Walter, 79, a retired farmer from Iowa, was traveling with his wife Margaret, 76, who had congestive heart failure and was swelling visibly in her ankles an hour into a 4-hour flight. Walter had never in his life asked for anything on an airplane. His daughter had coached him on this script before they left the house. He stood up, found the nearest flight attendant, and said it almost verbatim. The attendant took one look at Margaret's ankles, consulted the senior crew member, and had both Walter and Margaret move to business class seats where Margaret could recline fully and elevate her feet. The lead flight attendant also checked on Margaret twice more during the flight and had a wheelchair arranged at the arrival gate. Walter called his daughter from baggage claim and said it was the first flight in 3 years that Margaret had not required medical attention after landing. Use this when none of the above specific conditions apply, but you are experiencing genuine physical distress and want to make a direct, honest appeal. Say this: I need to share something with you privately. I am 70 years old, and I am having a genuinely difficult time physically in my current seat. I am not in a medical emergency, but I am in real discomfort, and I am concerned about the next several hours. I understand if nothing is possible, but I wanted to be honest with you and ask directly, is there any option on this aircraft that could help me? I want to say something directly about this script. It works because it is true, because it is humble, because it gives the flight attendant complete freedom to say no without conflict, while giving them every reason to say yes. In 22 years, I never once dismissed a senior passenger who spoke to me this way. Not once. The combination of honesty, age, and genuine discomfort presented respectfully is one of the most powerful things a passenger can say to a cabin crew member. We chose this career because we want to help people. Give us the chance to do that, and most of us will take it. A passenger named Agnes, 77, a retired seamstress from Georgia, was on a 6-hour flight and simply could not get comfortable. She had no diagnosis to cite, no letter from a doctor. She had arthritis, she was tired, and she was struggling. She pressed the call button, asked the flight attendant for a private word, and said almost exactly these words. The flight attendant found her a seat in premium economy, with an empty seat beside it, and brought her an extra pillow and a hot meal from the business class service. Agnes wrote the airline a letter afterward, saying it was the best she had ever been treated on a flight. The flight attendant received a commendation. One honest sentence changed the entire experience for both of them. Now, I want to be completely honest with you. These scripts work the large majority of the time on flights with available premium seats and cooperative crew. They do not work on completely full aircraft. They do not work on short flights where a crew is managing high-volume service with limited time. And occasionally, you will encounter a crew member who cannot or will not accommodate, regardless of the framing. Here is what to do when the answer is no. Step 1 is to accept the answer graciously and immediately ask one follow-up question. Is there anything at all you can do to make my current seat more comfortable? This question almost always produces something: a better pillow, an extra blanket, a bulkhead footrest, an aisle seat swap with a willing passenger. The crew member who cannot move you to business class can almost always do something, and giving them that second opportunity keeps the relationship cooperative. Step 2 is to document everything after landing and call customer relations within 48 hours. Describe your medical condition, the flight number, the crew interaction, and the discomfort you experienced. Ask whether a travel credit or partial refund is available given your medical circumstances. In my experience, roughly half of these calls result in some form of compensation. Travel credit, miles, a voucher, particularly when the passenger can reference a medical condition and a polite, documented request that was declined mid-flight. A passenger named Helen, 69, a retired teacher from Michigan, was on an overbooked flight where no premium seats were available. Her request was declined. She landed, called customer relations the next morning, described her situation calmly, and received a $200 travel credit and a note on her account, flagging her for proactive accommodation consideration on future flights. The flight she suffered through cost her nothing in the end. The call took 7 minutes. Now here are the 5 habits that the most prepared senior travelers practice before and during every long flight to make these scripts effortless. Habit 1 is to get a travel letter from your doctor before any flight over 3 hours. Ask your physician specifically for a letter stating your condition, your accommodation needs during air travel, and their recommendation for seating type. This letter costs you nothing to request. It converts every script in this video from a personal appeal into a documented medical claim. Bring 2 printed copies in your carry-on. The moment you hand a flight attendant a physician's letter, the entire conversation changes. Habit 2 is to research your flight's load factor before you board. Load factor means how full the aircraft is. Many airline apps now show seat maps that tell you how many premium seats are occupied. Board knowing whether there are empty business seats. A flight that is 40% full in business class is a very different conversation than a completely sold-out aircraft. Knowing this before you ask makes you more confident and your request more targeted. Habit 3 is to identify the senior flight attendant within the first 20 minutes of boarding. On every flight, there is a lead crew member, sometimes called the purser, who has the highest level of discretionary authority. This is the person you want to speak to. You can identify them by observing who the other crew members consult, who is briefing the galley before departure, or simply by asking a crew member quietly, "Who is the senior cabin crew member on this flight today?"